Welcome into Locked On Knicks. Julius Randle is eligible for an extension this summer, and there's lots of news and rumors and speculation going around about whether he is going to do it, whether he's not going to do it, how much money he might take, how much money he might not take. Do the Knicks need him to move on eventually to get better? We're going to talk about all this stuff right now on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks. We want to thank you guys for making Locked On Knicks first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or taking in the sights and sounds on YouTube. We appreciate you making us a part of your daily routine. Make sure you hit that auto download function on your favorite podcast app or the notification bell on YouTube so you never miss an episode. I'm Alex Wolf. I'm editor-in-chief of Knicks site, The Strickland, which you can find at thestrick.land. And he's Gavin Shaw, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster. And Julius Randle, maybe he's your favorite Knicks player. There's a lot of news going around about Julius right now and his forthcoming possible extension. Gavin, I think we've had a little more lately in terms of semi-definitive Jalen Brunson extension news, more so than Julius Randle. Julius, it's been sort of people just sort of moseying around the topic. Nobody quite wants to commit to a report about like, this is what it seems like Julius is doing. This seems what he's not doing. He's definitely doing the full court press of the hit every single New York activity over the last few weeks. He's been, at the Rangers game, at the Yankees game. I think he skipped the Mets game, probably smart as a Mets fan, but also rang the stock exchange bell, all this stuff. So he seems to be doing the PR tour for potentially getting a new contract out of the Knicks this offseason. But one of our buddies who's been on the show before, SNY's Ian Begley, recently wrote that he maybe isn't as confident that Julius is going to extend this summer compared to someone like a Jalen Brunson.
Yeah, and I can't wait to hear Ian expound on his reasoning for that, because the track record for the Knicks is they don't lose guys for nothing. And I've referenced that with OG Anunoby. I've referenced that with Isaiah Hartenstein. Jalen Brunson seems ready to just get this done early. And that's what makes it so interesting about with Julius is like, there's just so many different ways this can go, right? Like they could extend him. You don't really have to think about it. They could extend him and like, it doesn't go well. And they eventually trade him. They could not extend him and trade him before the deadline. They could not extend him and let the season play out. And he could sign next summer for a crazy amount of money. They could not extend him and he could just leave and walk for nothing next summer. Basketball gods forbid. So there's just a lot on the table in terms of how this could go. And I've referenced this on the show a bunch of times, but as much as it was his injury was just brutal in the sense that we got this taste of the Knicks playing like the best team in basketball. And then it was almost just as quickly robbed from us. And we had those, like, I don't know, this is an aside, but like, would you want like those 2 months of thinking he would come back? Like, would you want to erase that from your mind and just have known right away, all right, he's out for the season? I'm almost happy it was like a slow reveal that he was out for the year. I feel like that was less painful. I don't know. Where are you at on that?
I guess, I mean, seeing what we've seen now in the playoffs and seeing that the Knicks were interested in this guy, I think my only regret is that maybe if they knew that Julius was going to be out for the rest of the year, they would have gone a little harder on someone like PJ Washington instead of Bojan Bogdanovic, who felt more of like okay, low price, no first rounders involved. Like Quentin Grimes having a tough year. Quentin Grimes continued to have a tough year in Detroit. So that's not seeming like the worst, use of a player to acquire, a more seasoned player ever. So yeah, I think that's my only regret. But I mean, yeah, it was, I don't know. There are good aspects to it too, in the sense that the Knicks didn't feel the need to do anything too rash, though I question whether they'll ever do anything rash under Leon Rose, because it just doesn't seem to be their MO.
Yeah, I liked having hope for 2 months. I guess that's more of an emotional response. But anyways, I say that to say, as much as like just the sheer fact that it maybe cost them a run at a title this year, it was a loss of intel, right? Like we've never seen Julius play well in the playoffs, with maybe the lone exception being that 120-minute stretch against the Cavs where the ankle was pretty healthy and he was kind of just cooking Evan Mobley. And then of course, right away he hurts it again. And that all comes crashing down way too quickly. But this might have been the year. Like he looked really, really good with OG Anunoby. It was a shockingly clean fit. And it felt like even if he didn't totally give up on the worst parts of his game, he was able to push in the right direction, that extra 10% that made that team work really cleanly. The fact that not only had the skill set to do that, but he had the self-awareness to do that, I thought was a really good sign for what it would look like in the playoffs. And additionally, in the playoffs, like he would have had less pressure on him than he ever had before. So this was clearly a team that even without him was certainly capable of making the conference finals, if not for a disastrous other string of injuries, maybe even capable of making the finals without him. So there would have been less pressure than ever. And now we come into another year where we're especially one where you're potentially negotiating extension, and you're just kind of looking at yourself if you're Leon Rose and saying, like, I have no idea if this dude can get it done in the postseason. And that is what's both terrifying about this, but also what makes it such an interesting discussion.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I guess we could just start getting into like the numbers and what the Knicks might have to commit here and then revisit that question, again, like as we go forward. This is going to be a two-parter for anyone curious. So this first part, we're going to sort of introduce the what is going on this offseason as far as, what the Knicks can do, what their options are with Julius Randle. Then we'll talk a little bit about in the next segment, like about what percentage chance we think that we give, this actually happening this offseason, that Julius extends versus tries to hit free agency next year. And then, just kind of talk about his future a little bit and whether they ultimately might need to move on from him. Before next episode, we're going to talk about like if he was ever to move on, like where would they trade him or who might want to sign him. But let's just talk about the Knicks and, what they're able to do with him first. So he's eligible to extend starting on August 3rd of this year. He can extend his contract going, which basically would mean he would forego his final option year of his contract and sign a new contract that would start for the 2025 to 26 season because he currently has a player option for that. Same with Jalen Brunson. So that's the same deal with Jalen Brunson this offseason. If he signs an extension, it could go up to 4 years and 181 million this summer. I've also seen 4 years, 190 floated at some point. But so about a 45 million average value. If it gets up to 190, which I would assume maybe that's something to do with some bonuses or whatever, which was the case with his current contract too, where if he hit certain milestones, he would get more bonuses and make a few extra million every season. Anywhere from 45 to 47 million a season if he takes the maximum amount possible. But if he waits till free agency next year, his deal could be worth upwards of 5 years and $300 million with cap growth because the cap's going up this year. And then we've said this a couple times on recent shows, it's projected to go up 10% pretty much every year for the next half decade, maybe more than that, because that's the maximum number that the league has put in there to reduce cap swell when they sign new TV deals. But they've just signed a massive TV deal that might actually be still getting bigger as we speak, as TNT tries to buy rights back into it. So yeah, there's a lot of money going to be out there. And so Julius's contract could potentially become worth a average of 60 million a season if he waits till next offseason to sign a deal. So it's a pretty large delta there between 45 million and 60 million. He also just finished his third All-Star campaign in 4 years. He had one All-NBA second team, one All-NBA third team in the last 4 years. So Gavin, I think the big question comes down to, is he going to be willing to give the Knicks a discount again? And if he's not, then what does this mean for the Knicks? Because as you said, they don't like having uncertainties on their roster. Like they definitely like having guys that are locked down. They like knowing, okay, like they have an Evan Fournier on their roster going into this year. Became very evident that they were going to look to move him for some other salary, like a Bojan Bogdanovic, so they could control going forward and have as a trade chip and have, for utility purposes that way, rather than being like, oh, this guy might just leave. And, they have an OG Anunoby coming into this offseason and an Isaiah Hartenstein, which are kind of the two exceptions to that rule. But with one of their biggest stars, I don't know how in love they would be with the idea of like, oh, you're going to wait till next offseason and we don't know for sure that you're returning or not.
It makes you think they're going to trade him, not to the extent it did with Emmanuel Quickly last year, because I think almost we both loved him so much as a player. We weren't really being totally honest with ourselves. Like the second they didn't really reach an extension with Quickly last year, dude was gone in retrospect. Like it was over one way or another. And with Julius, like, I just don't think you could go that far, because I think he could look at it and they could also look at it like, hey, like, just bet on yourself, right? Like, as I was saying before, you've never shown us you could do this in the postseason. You think you can do in the postseason. We kind of think you can do. We don't think it $300 million worth. Maybe we think it $175 million worth. We certainly think it $156 million worth. So to me, that's the gap here. I think the Knicks are going to make Julius an offer that says, hey, we believe in you. We don't, you just have not, you don't have the track record, or as we're going to get into, like, the depth of suitors to justify pushing this off a year and going 5 for 300. I think the question for me is, like, does he have enough leverage to say, all right, like, I will do you the favor of doing this a year early, but I want the most amount of money I can get? Because we have to remember with Jalen Brunson, that $156 million number, it is a discount in the sense that he could get $90 million more for one more year a season from now. It's not a discount in the sense it is the most money he can get right now. So I think that's what's tricky, because, like, him and Julius signing that same deal, in one sense, it is the same deal. In the sense that Julius can get more right now, it's not actually the same deal.
Yeah, and we'll get into in our next segment the percentage chances that we think Julius will stick around, because I think I feel like I'm maybe slightly more confident than you right now, Gavin. So we're going to get into the numbers, and we'll everybody loves a good arbitrary number. So we'll do that in just a second when we get back in. But first, I got to remind everyone today's show is brought to you by BetterHelp. And we all carry around different stressors, big and small. And when we keep them bottled up, it can start to affect us negatively. And therapy is a safe space to get things off your chest and to figure out how to work through whatever is weighing you down, whether it's big or small. Because, might not be something huge like a death in the family or a big breakup or whatever. It might just be the work stressful, or, traffic sucked today, whatever. There's lots of little things that aggravate us during the day that can add up and lead to a worse mood and a worse state of mental health. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, you should give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. So get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedonnba today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba. All right, Gavin, we're back in to keep talking through this Julius Randle situation. And so I teased it at the end of the last segment, and may as well not, beat around the bush. If you were going to set a percentage chance that Julius Randle re-signs an extension with the Knicks this offseason, what would you put it at right now? Like, where's your confidence interval at?
I think it's very tricky, because it's do I trust myself or do I trust Ian Begley? Because I think my instinct, spoiler, is close to where you will end up. I would probably put it normally at about 65%. The fact that Ian said it's a no-go, though, I almost maybe I need better help for this. I almost don't trust myself. I kind of trust Ian more than I trust myself, because he's typically, like, especially when he puts out like kind of little hinty things like that, he's usually pretty on point with this stuff. And I'm wondering if there is like a pretty major gap there where Julius, and maybe this was actually spoken to Julius saying, hey, like, we need you to take a discount this time. We have to build out like the floor here. Once you keep this up and we're better situated, we're going to give you all the money you want. And if that conversation was had, or even the implication of that conversation was had, Julius might be like, hey, I've given it all for you guys. Like, I made 2 All-NBAs in 4 years. To your point, like, could have been 3 and 4 years. I've given up my body for this team. I was fighting through this injury to try to come back. I was going to put my career on the line. I was going to put my health on the line. Like we are good. We have proof of concept that we are great when I am on the floor. Maybe the best team in the NBA when I'm on the floor. I want to get paid. And if the Knicks are just looking at him like, yeah, but like, we got to see you healthy again, and we got to see in the playoffs one time. Like, there is a world where there is a gap here that is just too far to bridge. And to me, that I wonder if the Knicks, just because there maybe isn't such a great market for him if he reaches free agency, they are comfortable living in that gray. It does just feel like it feels very scary to get to that point. And the Knicks haven't scared us a lot because, to your point, they always seem to take care of this stuff before it comes up. So I'm going to meet in the middle of my two warring opinions and just call it 50-50. But Alex, I know you're a little bit more confident than I am.
Yeah, I'm thinking probably 70%, maybe even more. Um, I do think I think there probably is going to be some internal debate about how much to pay Julius with the Knicks this coming offseason. And I think that Julius and his agent might make a little harder of a push than last time to kind of secure the most money that they can. And Julius took like a little off the top with his last extension. Like he could have had, I want to say it was like 8 or 9 million more, something like that, over the life of the contract. And he took a little bit of a discount and added, took more of like bet on yourself incentives, which he hit on a lot of by making a couple more all-star teams and another all NBA team and all that stuff. So he made plenty of bonuses for himself and everything else. And I the more I think about it, the more I'm like, I don't know for sure that he's gonna do that again. Um, but I do think that he will see the appeal of signing an extension that matches with Jalen Brunson. And I do think there is something powerful about like the guy who is now clearly the best player on the team, the leader of the team, the voice of the team, Jalen Brunson, which I think Julius likes, to be honest. Like, I think that he likes that he can let loose a little more. He seems, ever since Brunson has been on the team and he hasn't had to be like the alpha anymore, he seems to be way more even keel, more at peace with things. He plays looser on the floor. So I think that seeing Brunson take his deal this offseason might inspire Julius to be like, okay, I'll do mine too. But like you said last segment, he might be like, I want the maximum this time. I want the maximum of what you can give me on an extension, and I will extend, and I'll probably cost myself, a solid chunk of money by doing that, potentially up to $100 million by doing that. But I'll do that because I love this team. I love where we're going. I'm still creating generational wealth for my family, whatever, like just not as much generational wealth. Maybe my kids won't have quite as much money, but I feel good about it. I feel good about, where the team's going, and I'm willing to take that discount. I also think just from like the Brock Aller perspective, the like cap nerd perspective, he might be looking at that and saying, hey, is 45 to 47 million a little more than we want to give Julius on an average annual value on his contract? Sure, because you would love to have everybody be on value contracts. But with these huge cap hikes coming up in the next number of years, maybe there is an appeal to saying, let's sign Julius to this number, because then, if this doesn't work out and, we feel like we need to make that last big upgrade, then now you have that salary chunk to make that happen. And you always need that in a big star trade. And, a lot of teams anymore with the parity in the NBA, I think a lot of teams now are less looking to offload their star player and just go full tank mode, especially if they're teams that like tried to do something, which a lot of teams have now and have these stars, but don't have a lot of draft picks anymore. And, might just be like, hey, like we're not going to control our own draft picks regardless. So let's still try to be as good as we can, even if we trade our star player, because we don't want to just benefit some other team. If they find a team like that, which, we'll talk about in our next episode where we get into the more, what teams could potentially be threats slash targets or whatever for the Knicks. But like, if you look like a Milwaukee or something and Giannis becomes available, Milwaukee will probably be like, let's still try to stay kind of good because we have no picks because we tried to build around Giannis. Like, so let's get a couple picks back from the Knicks, hope that things don't work out there, but we'll try to stay, play in territory over here at worst, So I think there's a decent chance that both sides see the benefit of that. My ideal would be that he signs for about the same Brunson does, but I would definitely not be upset if he signed like the 4-year, 181 million extension, because he's earned it. He's really good. He's a part of the DNA of this team. And honestly, the city at this point, I think the city really loves him. He's really made himself at home here. And I think everybody really likes him outside of a few angry YouTube commenters that hit us up all the time. But yeah, I think I'm pretty high on the scale of them getting this done this offseason.
Yeah, I think it's reasonable because it is like I think I've questioned like will the Knicks just kind of scoff at Julius's leverage, but at the end of the day, like the leverage is that it only takes one other team that's willing to pay him, right? Just one, and then he could be like, all right, you guys didn't respect me. You guys didn't appreciate what I did. I'll go to, let's just say, Charlotte. Like, I'll do it. I will quote unquote suffer with my $300 million in the bank, and the Knicks are left empty handed. And especially, like, I mean, here's the good news. Like, because the negotiations won't start on this, and if I'm remembering correctly, until August, the Knicks will know if they have Isaiah Hartenstein. They'll know if they have OG Anunoby. And that will certainly inform things. Like, if those guys left, then you just kind of have to, you say, Julius, 181 million. Date, like, you're running over there. The second he is eligible to sign that extension, say, hey, buddy, put pen to paper. Let's lock this up. You get both those guys back. You have a little bit more wiggle room. But at the same time, you just cannot lose this guy for nothing. And you don't want to be trading him from a position for weakness. So, you know what? If you want to tell me the deal is 4 for 181 or 4 for 190 with incentives, like, maybe I'll push my odds up to 55 to 60, because it just makes sense for Julius, given what he has. Like, if he had proven everything, and he was coming off an amazing postseason, he was coming off a year where he made second team All-NBA again. Like, if I was the agent, I'd be like, hey, buddy, let's wait one more year on this. Like, you're a killer. You're a bona fide top 15 player in the league. Because that's not there. Like, there is a reasonable middle ground for these two sides to meet at. And if it's 4 for 181, like, I'm with you. It's not my ideal, but I am okay with it. It'll lead to some creative cap work for the Knicks going forward. And maybe they just let him sign that with the plan that this is eventually going to be the contract in our superstar trade. If that's the situation, it's fine for the Knicks. And at the end of the day, it might not be his favorite, but it's fine for Julius, because to your point, he is getting life-changing money.
If I make one
go ahead.
last little note just about
Sure.
the free agency next year potentially too, and we'll get into this in the next episode when we dive deeper on this. But one thing to consider too is that the 5 for 300 number that is being thrown out there of like a supermax deal only exists for the Knicks, for what it's worth too. So that's something that he can only sign if he's on the Knicks. So if he goes to another team, he would be signing a 4-year deal still, which would be the same as this extension that he could sign this offseason. And now we're, for him to leave the Knicks, we're probably talking about I don't know, he's maybe leaving 50 million on the table, something like that, like probably half of what he's leaving from, from the supermax with the Knicks. So that's something worth considering as well. I haven't run the numbers yet on like what he'd be able to get on like a max contract from another team next year. And we probably won't know until we know what the cap is. But yeah, that's sort of where that lies too. So that might play into the calculus a little bit too, of when they're trying to pitch him on this. It's like, well, if you want to go find like quote unquote greener pastures, like you're not going to get as much money anyway as you would with this supermax, and we're not going to give you the supermax. So you can either take this one this year and stay on a good team, or make more money next year on a probably worse team that would be willing to pay you that much money.
Yeah, I think the one thing to consider, it's also where the Knicks have like maybe a little bit of leverage. Like, I don't even know if you call this leverage, but it's just a point. I don't think there's any world where he gets $300 million, and we'll get into why next segment, just because of the type of player he is, unless the Knicks won a championship or made the finals and he had a postseason, like, honestly, kind of similar to what Jalen Brunson just had, where he's putting up like 35 and 5 and he's shooting 40% from three. And you're like, all right, like this, he's somehow become a top 10 player in the league before our eyes. How likely that is, what it actually looks like if he extends with the Knicks, and what their ceiling would ultimately be. We'll talk about all that next on Locked On Knicks. But first, we want to tell you about our good friends over at FanDuel. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and more. And you can bet it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $200 you can use to bet on everything from Finals MVP to who's going to hit it out the park. So visit FanDuel.com/lockdown and add a big win to your summer bucket list. If I'm going to add a big win, I'm going to get a little bold. The Dallas Mavericks are 2.5-point underdogs to the Boston Celtics. I've taken the Boston Celtics, unfortunately, even if Kristaps Porzingis doesn't play, even if he's not at 100%. I just think they have too many answers to what Dallas does. I'm sure Luka Doncic is going to have an amazing game. I think it will be closer. I think the Mavs role players will shoot better. I just think the Celtics are clearly a better team, even if they're due for a little bit of a down game. So if you agree with me, head to FanDuel and check that one out. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Alex, let's wrap up on this. We're going to address the negative, Julius leaving. next episode, and maybe it says something about us that we're putting a whole episode on the negative and only one segment on the positive. Again, BetterHelp, call us. But what is Julius's future ultimately in New York if he does stay here? What does the ceiling of the team look like if he stays here?
Well, I guess that's like, it's sort of interesting because it's all going to depend on how the Knicks play their hand. Because I think there's two schools of thought. There's like the Knicks, if they play their hand right this offseason and find the right player that they can trade for, they could potentially make their last, what you figure would be their last significant trade roster upgrade. Or like, I guess you could call it like the big trade upgrade because they still haven't made that yet. Like they've done everything by just, well, okay, OG. OG is a big trade. He did fundamentally change what
They
this
haven't
team
dipped
is.
into their draft picks, is what you're getting at.
Yeah, they haven't dipped into the draft picks and they haven't traded for someone that would get like the quote superstar label yet. OG is just like the best role player ever created by the basketball gods. But like, at least in theory, as long as he stays healthy, of course. But um, they haven't made like that big splashy, tons of draft picks outgoing, type move yet. So the thing with Julius with the extension, and especially where I get to the point where I'm like, you know what, just give him the maximum of what he can get on the extension potentially this year, is that they can still get better with Julius still on the team. Like they don't have to use him as the main chunk to make that trade happen, because they have a Bojan Bogdanovic, because they have, unfortunately, Mitchell Robinson, who I would hate to part with, but who makes a decent enough chunk of money that you start building towards that big salary. You need to trade for another player, and then they have enough other smaller contracts that they can throw in there. Unfortunately, it would probably be like a Deuce McBride or something, and then some of the end of bench guys have option years. So like if they want to do something by like this draft, like I mean, there's a chance in 2 weeks we're going to be talking about a fundamentally different Knicks team, because if we're talking about percentage chances, I think it's almost 50-50 that they make a move before the new league year starts, just because of how it would affect their cap situation, their ability to pay big contracts to OG and iHeart and feel okay with it, with the luxury tax, stuff like that. So like you really have to kind of get into the weeds to think about like how they could get better with Julius still on the team, but it's really possible. And there's a chance that like if Julius becomes like your third option on offense and is like, can be a guy that you can comfortably sub out 5 minutes into a game and then bring back in to run your bench unit when Jalen Brunson goes out all the time. I mean, he'll just feast. I mean, he'll be so good. And if you have another superstar there to help take a little more of that pressure off, and then you've got like a true break big three plus OG Anunoby plus Isaiah Hartenstein, like that's crazy, man. Like this team could win a title with Julius then. I think where it gets a little more dicey is if they don't make that move before this offseason starts, and then they have to pay Hartenstein and they have to pay Anunoby, and then they extend Randle and they extend Brunson. Then that means that this time next offseason, you're almost certainly a second apron team, at which point the ability to trade for players on other teams and improve your team goes down drastically, because all of a sudden you can't trade for slightly more salary in a trade anymore and use trade exceptions that way. And you can't trade certain picks, and you can't use certain exceptions to sign players to go over the cap anymore. So you can't use like the same exception they used to sign Dante DiVincenzo this past offseason. And suddenly things get a little more tight around the collar, and you go, all right, well, now maybe we'll have to trade Julius Randle if we want to get better. Because, if he doesn't perform in next year's playoffs and there's no more, I'm not going to call them excuses. There's no more reasons that, he wasn't able to, and he goes in healthy and still puts up something more akin to what he did in 20 to 21, then you have to start saying like, I thought of this analogy right before we started recording, but like you have to ask yourself, hey, is this sort of a Toronto Raptors situation, like a perennial 1 seed that just couldn't quite get over the hump and ultimately had to trade one of the guys that got them to that point in DeMar DeRozan to put themselves over the top by getting a Kawhi Leonard, who was the guy that be the finishing piece and make them a title team. Maybe that's the case for the Knicks if things don't go well with Julius. If it were me, I would try to make a full court press to make whatever moves you're going to make this offseason and get it all set and just be like, you know what? We're going to be a second apron team regardless, even if we just run it back. So let's go big, find that star who becomes available, and we're going to be the high bidder, period. Like, we're going to figure out how to make that work. We'll get other teams involved if we need to for salary, whatever, but we'll figure that out and we will get that player and make this run starting this year, because I think it's the time too. But yeah, I think that's kind of what it comes down to with Julius. It might not even really be up to him or his play in some ways if he ends up sticking with the team or not for the long term towards the potential titles. It might just be, do they make the move this offseason? And if not, like, he might just have to be collateral damage at a certain point for this team to get better.
Yeah, no, it's all good points. It's got my brain going in a million directions. And I'm just the way I keep thinking about it is like right now, unfortunately, the Celtics are the kings of the East. And it looks also, unfortunately, pretty sustainable as Brad Stevens. Like, give him credit. Like, I still don't get how he got Kristaps Porzingis and got picks out of it when KP was excellent with the Wizards last year. But they got their deals in time, right? Because now they're going to extend Tatum. They already extended Holiday. Presumably White stays. They got KP on what's going to, like, a deal that's going to look really good if he stays healthy, which is, I mean, similar to what the Knicks with Anunoby. Like, it's always going to be a question, but that is the team you're gunning for right now. And I think in a world where the Celtics were still the same version of the team that they were like 2 years ago, where it was Marcus Smart and Tatum and Brown, and like, sure, maybe throw Derek White in there even. I think that team was very beatable. And I honestly think this, like, with this current version of the Knicks, if we just ran everything back, I think the Knicks could beat that team. And I think the Knicks would maybe even be favored over that team. The current version of the Celtics, like, I think they're beatable. I think it might take an injury on their end. Like there was just higher end talent there. And that's because they unfortunately built this near perfect two-way team where the only thing they're lacking is maybe a true overwhelming number one alpha, because right now in the biggest moments in the finals, it doesn't appear to be Jason Tatum. And that could flip overnight. But the Knicks might have an edge there with Jalen Brunson. I say all that to say, like there is logic to going out and getting another star. But if you're under that pressure of having to do it this summer, do you have to settle for an imperfect one? Like if Devin Booker is the ideal fifth starter with that team, because I'm thinking, like, when you say, all right, it's going to be Julius, it's going to be OG, it's going to be Hardenstein, it's going to be Jalen Brunson. I'm like, all right, what's the spot on the floor that's open? Shooting guard. And like Dev is someone who's big enough defensively, good enough shooter offensively, deadly enough off-ball player offensively is maybe the most important thing, because whoever it is, no matter how good they are, you have Jalen Brunson, you have Julius Randle, you're going to be spending a good chunk of time off the ball. Ideally, it would be Devin Booker. The Suns, there is not a world like the Knicks can offer them everything where they are trading Devin Booker this offseason. So then you have to go, all right, like, does Donovan Mitchell make some sense? And I've maybe not long, but for a good chunk of time, been against that. The Knicks do not seem super enthused about that. But I almost wonder if you have to circle around and just say, all right, bottom line, are we better with this guy than we are without this guy? Because you have those picks, but those picks lose value, one, as soon as they become players. Two, as soon as you don't necessarily have the cap room to trade them to bring guys in. And like, if push comes to shove, like, maybe you trade Dante DiVincenzo at some point. Maybe you, again, basketball gods forbid, you trade Josh Hart at some point. Like, there will always be options. But to your point, as time goes along, they get more and more painful. And maybe that flips in 3 years when the cap is just so much higher that the Knicks go under the apron naturally. And to your point in previous episodes, do it by having contracts that are descending. Like, there are ways the Knicks can game this where there's another window, but this window right now is open, and maybe you have to settle for an imperfect option. If they don't do anything and they just keep Julius, like, I'm weirdly enough a believer that he is going to be an effective postseason player for the Knicks. I just don't know if he's going to be so effective that they're a championship team versus like a really, really competitive Eastern Conference Finals team. And that's like 85% of what he does in the regular season. Him doing that in the playoffs, that's what most guys do in the playoffs. Most guys in the playoffs are 15% worse than they are in the regular season. It is generally the true blue superstars, and maybe with the Knicks, the true blue role players who can actually elevate their games in the playoffs. If Julius is pretty close to who he normally is, that's enough, but maybe not quite enough for a title.
Yeah. And, I guess that would lead the Knicks down the path of, what if they needed to trade Julius Randle, or who would they even do that with, or whatever, which we'll talk about in our next episode. So keep tuned tomorrow when we'll bring that one out and talk about the doomsday scenarios with Julius Randle. So, something for you all to get mad about in the YouTube comments, I'm sure. But at any rate, thank you all for listening to this episode, and we will talk to you all soon. Peace out, everybody.